Hi everyone, thanks for coming. Spring's almost here, it's a very nice day. My name is Chris Johnster, President of the American Society of Landscape Architects Morgan State Chapter. And I want to say thank you to Sarah for calling Reuben to come today. Our guest speaker today is Reuben Rainey. He is Professor Emeritus of Landscape Architecture from University of Virginia. He also has a PhD from Columbia University, a Master of, Union Theological Seminary, is that right? Master in Divinity, sorry. Reuben Rainey's research and publication focuses on the history of landscape architecture, cultural landscape studies, and the design of patient-centered healthcare facilities, including healing gardens and acute care hospitals. Before entering the field of landscape architecture in 1975, he taught comparative religion at Columbia University and Middlebury College. Before retirement in 2006, he taught design studios as well as lecture courses and seminars in the history of landscape architecture in the United Kingdom, Europe, India, China, Japan, the Near East, South America, and the United States. He also offered courses in the history of the American cultural landscape and the design of patient-centered medical facilities. Since retirement in 2006, he has continued to teach a seminar on the design of patient-centered medical facilities. Currently, Reuben Rainey is currently co-director of the Architecture School's Center for Design and Health, which he founded along with Tim Beatley of the Department of Urban and Environmental Planning and David Kemp, an alumnus of the School of Architecture's program in landscape architecture. So, without further ado, let's give a round of applause for Reuben Rainey.
Well, it's a delight to be here, and I'm envious of your wonderful facility. We have a nice architecture school too, but this is really quite wonderful. So what I'm going to do this evening, can you hear me okay? I haven't been teaching for a while, so I'm a little hoarse. My voice isn't as strong as it used to be. I want to talk about healing spaces in medical facilities for about 45 minutes, 50 minutes or so, and then we can have questions. And the way I'm going to do this, I'll give some preliminary definitions so you know where I'm coming from on this and what I'm assuming, certain things. And then I want to do two case studies. I want to do a case study of a garden for dementia sufferers in Kings Mountain, North Carolina. And I want to do a case study of the Emily Current Cancer Center. It's an outpatient cancer center at the University of Virginia medical campus. And I think instead of just showering you with a lot of different examples, I think by digging a little deep into these two designs, we can begin to get some idea of the issues involved here. Now, what do I mean by a healing space? Well, if you look at the etymology of the verb to heal, it means to make whole. And we get it comes from Middle English, halen, and we get such terms as whole, wholesome, sound, and holy. And the point I want to make is that health is not just the absence of disease. I know at the beginning of a class I taught in healing spaces, I would ask my students, what do you mean by health? And most of them would say, well, yeah, I'm well, I've got the flu, I'm okay. But that's only one dimension of health. Health has three dimensions: physical, of course, psychological, and social. And a good healing space will address all of these. Excuse me, I hit the button here. Okay. Now, I know you have a club here, a design health club. Any of you members of that club who are attending tonight? Yeah, so I admire that. I wish we had one. But people in that club will know that, well, excuse me, I just have to stay away from this thing. In a medical situation, the main purpose of a healing space is to reduce stress. And I don't have time to go into the physiology of stress, but stress will slow down the healing process, especially long-term stress. It will make a patient more prone to infection. And whatever their malady is, it will make that worse. So stress is the main target of healing spaces, but not just stress, also cognitive improvement. And that comes into play with staff. Staff are under tremendous pressure. So a well-designed healing space can not only reduce their stress, which makes them less prone to errors, and there have been studies that show that, but also a cognitive improvement that they can think sharper in stressful situations. And it's important to remember when one is dealing with the medical environment that you have three constituencies, not just the patients. The patients, of course, are critical, but there's also the staff and there's also the visitors. So all three of these constituencies, their particular needs need to be addressed in the design itself. Now, how do you go about designing these spaces? Well, I'm educated as a designer. I'm not a social scientist or a natural scientist, even though I used to be a pre-med at one time. The intuition of the designer, the experience of the designer, the designer's knowledge of precedent, of best practices is critical. But we also need what is called evidence-based design. Now, there are different definitions of evidence-based design, and one I like is that it's a process for making decisions on the design of healthy environments based on credible research to achieve the best possible outcomes. What do I mean by credible research? Well, it's social science and it's natural science. And these are critical aids to the designer, because if you don't have knowledge of evidence-based design, you can make mistakes that will make matters worse than better, particularly in a medical framework. Now, evidence-based design is getting more and more precise. We have, medical imaging now we didn't have 30 years ago, which is incredible. fMRI scans and that kind of thing, which is an improvement. And of course, digital technologies. We can now mock up health environments. This is a pretty spectacular light show. You do this all the time. Shall I start singing here while we do this? But that's okay. But anyway, we can mock up medical environments. Thank you. And test them. We can actually also test people viewing these mocked-up environments. This is at the University of California, San Diego, using star cave technology to explore wayfinding in a medical facility. Now, having praised evidence-based design, I think it's very important to understand its limitations. And often people claim more for it than is really legitimate. It's difficult to do. It's hard to study the medical environment, because often you end up affecting what's going on there just from your study. So you have to be careful in that environment. It takes a lot of permissions, which, protecting patient confidentiality is really important, and so forth. But evidence-based design itself, it's hard to control the variables. It's very hard to repeat a design, because most medical facilities are going to slightly differ from each other. And the results that you get, the positive health outcomes, are really health outcomes that are by association and not causality. So you have to be very careful about claiming causality, because you can lose immediate respect from the medical profession if you overreach. The other thing is, let me come back to this. I'll just give you an example. I don't want to digress too much into this, but many of you may know a very famous study that was done in 1984 by a man named Roger Ulrich, and he took patients on the same floor in a hospital, having the same operation, having the same rooms, having the same nursing staff, and he screened for all sorts of things: health, age, smokers, seriously ill people. And the only difference that the patients experienced was that half the patients looked into a brick wall, half of them looked into a landscape scene, a bosque of trees. What Ulrich discovered is the ones with the tree view got out earlier. They took less powerful and also dangerous pain medication, and they really complained less, meaning they were less stressed. So, but when Ulrich concluded his study, he said that yes, there is some association with this view of nature, but he never produced a theoretical explanation for it. He could measure the health outcome, but why nature had this effect, we don't know. At the University of Virginia, we do experiments with EEG caps, electroencephalogram caps, which show us that alpha waves, which are brain waves that indicate lack of stress and calm, increase when students walk from busy traffic areas into the grounds of the University of Virginia itself. But again, why nature, why the gardens at UVA, why the grounds themselves have this effect? There are various theories. Now, I don't have time to go into the theories. The point is, people don't agree. Now, is that a disaster? I would say no, because we can measure health outcomes. We can see that exposure, say, to nature is positive. People heal quicker and so forth. That's no reason, because we don't have a theory to explain it, not to apply these principles in a medical facility. And to me, it's like aspirin. As far as I know, no one quite understands how aspirin works. Understands some of it, but would you deny aspirin to someone because there's no theory behind it? Obviously not. So that's the situation we're in. I don't want to labor that too much, but I think that's important to understand. Well, what about this? It's always hovering in the background in a medical facility. It's clear that evidence-based design features, they cost more initially. There's no way around that. But in the long term, they prove to be economically advantageous. Now, don't get me wrong, I think the reason for good evidence-based design is compassion, it's relief of suffering, but you cannot escape the almighty dollar in the medical environment. So there are studies, and I don't have time to go into them, that show that in the short term, maybe 1 or 2 years, the additional cost will raise the construction budget, but in the long term, it will completely pay for itself. Well-designed medical facilities, the staff makes fewer errors, so they're not going to be expensive lawsuits. There's fewer staff turnovers. Replacing staff is very expensive. Patients heal faster. Therefore, there's a greater turnover of beds and more profit for the hospital itself. So that it's a win-win situation. In the short term, more expensive, maybe 20% of the budget, but within 1-2 years, it pays for itself. And there are a number of studies that show that. Now, I just make another obvious point that that some of the design principles I'm going to talk about tonight, they don't just apply to medical facilities. That's my interest right now, but they apply to schools, they apply to office buildings, they apply to neighborhoods, they apply to cities, so that they have a huge range. But I'm just focusing tonight on medical facilities. One example of that, I'm sure you recognize the Salk Institute, Louis Kahn's great design. It's a research center in La Jolla, California for world-class scientists. This is the famous view you always see. But what I didn't realize when I visited there is that if you drop down a level to where the labs are, here, there, we drop down, to this level, that we were looking in the opposite direction. I got it back.
That's what I meant.
Wow, this is getting pretty exciting. What you find is that across from the labs, are small gardens, so that when a scientist cognitively is exhausted, they can simply step out and relax in their garden. When Jonas Salk was struggling to discover the polio vaccine, I'm old enough to remember when polio was a real threat in the summer. We were all scared of it. He hit a brick wall, and so he just relaxed. He went to Assisi, Italy, relaxed for a year. He so loved the landscape of Italy that it relaxed him, and he had his breakthrough. And so when he asked Kahn to design the Salk Institute, he insisted that these gardens be there to relieve the cognitive stress of his scientists, just as he had experienced the same thing. I don't know what I've done, it won't move. Let's try this one. I told Sarah that I told Sarah that I can just look at a computer and it'll crash. And it has these mystic powers.
Backwards.
Okay. All right. We'll get to our case studies in a minute. A couple of things about the design of healing spaces. And this is a good example. It's the Joel Schnapper Garden in the Terrence Cardinal Cook Hospital in New York City. There are two things about them. First of all, they're team design because they require a lot of expertise. Designer is not a physician, so you have to have input from the physician about symptoms and what can aggravate the symptoms, which doesn't. You need any staff member, the physical therapist, the nurse. You need the CEO who controls the budget. You need the maintenance staff. You need, and better yet, you need the patients and also their families to give input into the design of the facility itself. And that's certainly true in this case, the history of it. The other thing is, every healing space is specific to a medical context. There's no such thing as a generic healing space. You have to tailor the space to the medical situation. In this case, this is a garden for HIV/AIDS sufferers. If you look at it, you can see there are three different kinds of light. Can you hear me okay when I turn my back?
Yeah, just don't touch it.
Shade, dapple light, sunlight. AIDS patients are sensitive to various degrees of light, so here they're given a choice to choose the light that best suits them. They're engaged in horticultural gardening, so you notice that some are gardening standing up, some are in a wheelchair sitting down.
Yeah, just don't touch it.
From the way. You'll notice how thin the joints of the pavers are because people are in wheelchairs. They have IV poles, so you don't want to jar them as you roll over these and so forth. I could go into minute detail on this, but you get the point that this particular garden is tailored to this particular disease. Here's an example, another one, and I'll just deal with this very briefly. This is the Virginia Commonwealth University Massey Center Cancer Garden. For cancer patients, especially undergoing chemo and radiation therapy, they are very, very susceptible to smell, even good smells, even the aroma of flowers. So in this garden, Herb Shaw has virtually no scented plants. Now there's an azalea here, but it doesn't have much of a scent. So if he had packed this garden with scented flowers, it would nauseate the patient. So you have to be very, very careful about what you're doing. Okay, let's get to our case studies, and I'll have to move a little bit quicker on this. Let's look at a garden first. The Life Enrichment Center, an adult care center in Kings Mountain, North Carolina. Again, it's by David Camp. David Camp actually is also a UVA alumni. We were classmates together. Now, I said this is a garden for dementia sufferers. You know, a daycare center is a family member drops off a parent or a grandparent. They stay here during the day and then they pick them up in the evening. And as I say, probably 90% were suffering from some form of dementia, either vascular dementia or Alzheimer's, which was the more prevalent. Well, what do we know about dementia as a symptom? Well, people have tendencies to wander. People are easily oriented, disoriented spatially. They also are prone to claustrophobia. So in the design of the garden, I don't have time to go into the building, but from day one, the architect and the landscape architect are working together on this, which is really an important thing to do. But to address the problem of wandering, there is a fence around the entire garden itself, but it's not an opaque, high brick wall. It's very transparent, and I'll show it to you in a moment, so that it almost vanishes into the landscape in certain points. So it undercuts claustrophobia. You'll notice that this design is very simple. It has three parts: a porch, an activity garden, and a strolling garden.
You can't touch the screen, Reuben.
I have Viking heritage, and after a while, I may have a tantrum here. Okay. All right, don't get too close.
No, Reuben, it's the, you can't touch the screen, literally.
Don't touch it.
Yeah.
Okay. Non toccare. Okay. So, three parts: a porch, an activity garden, and a strolling garden. You'll notice they're arranged on axes: a central axis, a cross axis, terminated by trellises, and then a strolling garden. You know, if someone presented this in a design studio and you didn't know what it was, you would say, well, it's kind of a dumb design, axis, cross axis. Can't you make it more rich and complex and layered and, you know? No, be an absolute disaster. So it's very simple so people don't get confused. The porch is like a landmark. I'll show it in a moment. You can see it from any place in the garden. It's like a lighthouse to orient you. And you'll notice that the strolling garden itself, it doesn't give you any choice. It just loops back on itself so no one's going to get confused, get into a corner. That's one of the worst things you can do with someone who suffers from dementia. So let's look at it on the ground. You can see in section the three parts: the porch, the activity garden, the strolling garden. You see these things are birdhouses. I'll show you those in a moment. In this facility, it's very important that people be in routines during the day so that they can feel a sense of order and familiarity. So there's a special group that replenishes the bird feeders, and they do other things as well. There's a careful relationship between the main gathering space in the building itself and the garden itself is visible from the interior, so it's never hidden. People know where it is. These are skylights coming in, providing natural light, which is really important, especially for people with mental problems. You can see here how the porch, how visible it is. It's just like a landmark. Wherever you are on the site itself, you can see it. The porch itself is done in a traditional neo-colonial style, which is very, very familiar to the people of this particular region of North Carolina. Since dementia patients are liable to falling and stumbling, that's a padded ground plane there. You'll notice that the entrance to the garden here is to the side, so whatever activities are taking place here, you don't interfere with them. So there are lots of tiny little details that matter a great deal. In the activity garden, notice the paving changes so that people gardening from wheelchairs or with walkers can reach the plants, and then this area is clearly differentiated so that it doesn't interfere with the circulation. In the trellises that terminate that cross axis, you can see how transparent that part of it is. The trellises are places for different activities. Here is the flower arranging group that will, meet every day at a certain time and then cut flowers and arrange them in the season. There is a garden here, a vegetable garden. Many of these people are from rural farm backgrounds, so they're able to do that. You can see the transparency in the fence now that I was talking about. And then a flag for the old veterans. They raise and lower the flag every day. I made a documentary film of this. I do documentary films from time to time for public television and spent a week here. It was really quite amazing to see all these different rituals and how enthusiastic the dementia sufferers were. Then the stroll garden itself is a multisensual garden. It's visibly attractive, but it has these highly tactile grasses here. I can't play the bird song to you, but it's on the edge of a forest, so it's an ecotone, and lots of birds will gather there. So it engages really almost all of the senses itself, which is really important for this type of garden. And then, of course, most of these people are elderly, so you have to be very careful to arrange seating. This is not the world's most comfortable seat, but it was donated. It was free, so they had to take what they could get. Here's what happens when you don't understand the symptoms of dementia. This was a well-intentioned garden. It really dates from the late 70s when we didn't know as much about dementia sufferer design. So you can see the mistakes here. Opaque wall, very high. The space was so claustrophobic that many of the day residents just wouldn't go into it. And then there's a waterfall here that cascades down. Well, it became an escape hatch for some people. One man, I mean, the staff here was very candid with me about this. They said that there was an ex-football player from Clemson, tight end, very big guy, 6'6", I don't know how many pounds. Came out into the garden, everyone was happy, someone was in it. His caregiver turned her back on him, he took off all his clothes, ran up that ramp, jumped the wall, and took off in the neighborhood itself. So, I mean, that's an extreme case, but you just can't make mistakes like that without suffering the consequences. So I don't want to end on a negative note for this, but the thing also to remember is, design can just go so far. The bedrock of any medical facility are the caregivers themselves, and of course the professionalism of the physicians. And so by creating a good environment, you create a good work environment for them, so they can do a better job. So that these dementia sufferers here, I think they're arranging pumpkins, but you can see she can do a much better job with a much better environment. Any questions on this before I go on? Okay, let's look at the building. Let's look at the Emily Curritt Cancer Center. Richard Clark, ZGF Architects. Now, if you look at the literature of evidence-based design, over the last 30 years, these design principles emerge, having, I think, perhaps less so for this last one, but the rest of them have been pretty much established as having positive health outcomes. Now, there are more. This is not all of them. But I think these are the essentials. If a building can incorporate these, I think it's going a long way to being a first-rate medical facility from an architectural point of view. And of course, the environmental qualities of the building are crucial too. This building, amazingly enough, is a LEED Gold certified building. That's very hard to achieve. There are few at the platinum level. The new tower at UVA is platinum, but when you consider the energy consumption and all the other things, it's pretty hard to do that. But this building doesn't. Of these various facilities, I don't need to read them out to you. You can read, but noise is the number one stressor in a medical facility. So noise abatement is critical. All these things are. Wayfinding is, bad wayfinding really stresses patients, but also staff. Natural light, the great thing about your building here, I love the natural light that comes into it. It uplifts you. But it's a healing agent. There have been plenty of studies to show the healing power of natural light. Excellent ventilation, that's essential to filter out pathogens, but also to filter out the medicinal smell of the medical facility, which can stress people. Exposure to nature, real and virtual. Of course, I'm interested in that because I'm a landscape architect, but the virtual is also important because in some cases in this building, you cannot have plants, real plants inside the building because it's a cancer treatment center. You can't have water either. So virtual plants, and not only that, but art, I'll talk about that in a moment, are critical. So let's look at how this building embodies this thing. Privacy for the patient, of course, is critical. This being an outpatient facility means that there are no overnight rooms here. So I'm not going to talk about patient room design, but it's critical, and not only privacy, but patient empowerment, to give the patient as much control over a room as possible, lifting the shades, controlling the lighting, controlling all the devices, access to the internet, phone for friends. All those things are critical. Okay, just to show you this building in context quickly. This is the UVA medical campus, the old 1960s hospital, the new medical school, the primary care facility, the acute care main hospital, and here's the current center. You can see it's wedged in here because UVA's medical campus doesn't have a lot of space. It's wedged in, and it's a very linear building, and I'll show you in a moment that that creates some problems. Okay, if we just look at the facade of the building, you can see immediately those design principles I was talking about. Exposure to nature. Here the gardens are on the outside. There's one here, and there's one you can't see on the fourth floor roof. Look at the transparency of this building, how much natural light is pouring into it. Circulation is very clear, up the elevator, down the hall, turn right into the clinical areas here. Note that inverse gable roof or butterfly roof. Can you guess what that's for? I hate to admit it, I'm hard of hearing, so I'm going to come back close.
Water collection.
Exactly, water collection that goes down this drain into an underground cistern, and that water's used to maintain the gardens and the plants. So you can already see many of these features. Look at the enormous ventilation system there. So far so good, but I'm going to show you some real problems here in a moment. We were looking from that end. This is the main entry. Again, you see the transparency, see the beginnings of the garden on the fourth floor. This hallway receives natural light. These are restrooms. They also receive natural light. Now, here's kind of good news and bad news in terms of this building. The circulation is basically good. This is third floor. I don't know how well you can see this. Elevators, main waiting room, check-in desk. When you're accompanied by a physician, you go down the hall, into this area, into the clinical room. And then when you're finished with whatever procedure you're undergoing, you exit this corridor, which leads you back to the elevator. So you can see it's a loop system, so easy circulation through it. And then here, a very important feature, a separate service hallway for moving in heavy equipment that can be very noisy. I mean, people have done decibel experiments there. Sometimes it can get as noisy as a motorcycle. So all that is kept separate here. Also, supplies can be replenished here without interfering with any of the patient work here. That's taken from Walt Disney. They talk about it as on stage, off stage, or back of the house, front of the house. It's like Disneyland with its hidden underground services with Mickey Mouse. If you've ever been, it just pops up all of a sudden. All this stuff is moved in, but you don't see it because it's underground. It's the same principle here. Now, what's the problem? Two problems. One less serious than the other. The most serious one, you can probably guess what it is. If you could read this plan, the elevators are only here. There are no elevators at this end. So these are weakened patients. Often they have to go up and down floors, and they have to walk down these long hallways into these exam rooms. It becomes very, very tiring. Somehow that got missed in the design of this building. The other thing is the workrooms. One here, they're spread around. Were much too small. University of Virginia is a teaching hospital. So these small workrooms for the physicians just weren't large enough because a specialist would come in trailed by 5, 6, 7, 8 interns, and they need more space. So these spaces were really crowded. What's happened is, they've been knocked out walls and made them larger now. That was not too expensive to do, but to this day, the elevators have not been put here. The way that's addressed now is people have been hired with wheelchairs to carry patients back and forth if they're too weak. Now, quickly going through this, you can see this is the interspace, how much natural light is coming into it. The first floor waiting room, the waiting room on the third floor that I was just showing you, the hallways, it's just natural light is pouring in. There are various awnings and things that can adjust it. In the patient rooms, this is the chemotherapy room for a patient, views and natural light, and then patients are given a choice. They can either take their chemo by themselves, or they can join with others that they've gotten to know in a group facility. So again, patient choice and empowerment is important. This is proving to be a little difficult for scheduling, but the intention and partial function is still there. Quiet acoustical tiles that absorb sound, rugs in the more public areas, and then the use of virtual nature. This is, I'm on the art committee. I helped choose the art for this building, and my committee does all the choices for the UVA medical campus. So we've used a lot of nature views, particularly familiar ones. This is a mountain range, the Blue Ridge, that's very close to Charlottesville. It's a photo mural. People actually come up here and they pick out their house on the photo mural. In the check-in area here, more landscape. In the ground floor level, and you have to be very careful with your language in a medical facility. You don't say basement, because basement, if it's like my basement, it has a really negative connotation. So the ground floor, where the radiation therapy is, those machines are huge. You cannot put them on the upper floors without an incredible structure to support them. So they're usually on the ground floor. There's no view out. There's no natural light coming in. That's where we put our largest landscape, virtual landscape depictions, and also in the examination rooms themselves. Besides representations of nature, familiar landmarks, historic landmarks, are very important. This is the old railroad station at Orange County, Virginia. We had no idea how popular this thing was going to become. We put it near one of the check-in desks, and there was such a crowd around it, we had to move it. And one man actually wrote a history of it and printed it out for people to pick up. So these things are wonderfully stress relieving. And then we've done some experiments, and here we're on, I would say, difficult ground. But so far, so good. We've tried to introduce some humor into the facility itself. So this is a local artist who owns a herd of cows, and she paints individual portraits of the cows, and their names are on a nameplate next to them. And people love these things. They laugh at them, they remember them, they actually one person tried to steal one of them, which I guess is a compliment. So we're beginning to do the good thing about art in these facilities. If people don't like it or it's disturbing, well, you just take it out. So we check on these things. This is another one. This is Cynthia Burke, whom I know is a local artist. She paints these sorts of animal portraits. A groundhog dressed like, I don't know what, an English lord in a smoking jacket. Some are dressed like Louis the 14th, you name it. We experimented with some of these things. We gave them to the staff in the clinical areas and said, put these wherever you want and tell us how people react. Well, people laugh at these things. They love them. They take their smartphones, take pictures of them, and send them out to their loved ones in the waiting room. So it seems like, it's a good addition, but we keep checking. Now, a couple of other things. To create a sense of familiarity, this is a cancer center that's mostly regional. North Carolina, Virginia, West Virginia, to a certain degree Maryland, although you have Johns Hopkins, which is probably the greatest hospital in the world as far as I'm concerned. But we themed floors of the hospital according to the different physiological provinces of Virginia: coastal plain, Piedmont, mountain, valley. And this is a presentation panel, but on those floors, we put a selection of pictures like the coastal plain, some ships, some boats, down in what we call the Tidewater area of Virginia. Same floor, sand dollars, on the doors. These pebbles, which are supposed to be reminiscent of a beach and so forth. So trying to make the building more familiar. A lot of people, I think because they're so stressed, they don't see this symbolism. Oh really, you themed this building according to this. So some see it, some don't. The gardens, quickly, the gardens, the good thing about them is they were designed with the building itself. There are three of them. One of them on the first floor, one on the first floor level. I'm sorry, it's a habit. I started teaching with a wooden pointer before lasers, and I always like to rap on them. Stop my instinct here. So on the first floor, this garden here is like a large planter with a screen around it that you look at from inside the building. They're on the same level. It's a little hard to read this. This is the fourth floor rooftop garden. Now, the good thing is they were designed with the building. The unfortunate thing is some of their details were value engineered out, which makes them, these two especially, virtually unusable. This is the fourth floor garden. What's missing here?
Shade.
Shade, exactly. Bing. Duh. But it got taken out. And for that reason, it really limits the use. It's redeemable. It can be remedied. But here's the original presentation drawing with a canopy of vines and lushness and all that sort of thing. So that's yet to be realized. Dropping down to this level, to this garden, which is one of the more successful ones. It took a while. The idea was, this is the original sketch. You sit inside the building, there's the window, the edge of the building, and then you look into this large planter with a steel frame around it that has vines growing up over it to provide privacy for that. They wanted water in it, a water wall, no water wall, so that's been taken out. So you can see it at an early stage. The vines have grown up now. But it's had its hard times because the original planting plan just didn't work out and all the plants died. Can you imagine coming into a meditation space and looking at dead plants? So they had to go. Now they've been replaced with a sort of Zen garden with shade tolerant plants, and it works fine now. But point I'm making is, you can try your best to design these buildings, use evidence-based design, but sometimes problems arise, especially when essential things are cut out of the design itself, which is the case at least with a number of these gardens. And then finally, well, you can look, things have been added to it, little beads for wishing. There's a sound machine for natural sound, rain, ocean surf. They're using yoga sessions in here. People are taking chemo in it. So the garden it's taking root. Here is potentially a mistake, and I helped choose these. We thought the urns would add a certain variety to the design itself. Unfortunately, a few people see them as crematation urns. Yeah, I can see people say, aha, making that association. So we may take them out. We haven't taken them out yet. But it just shows you, how difficult it is, because you can't please everyone, and people have so many associations. Okay, the final garden here, it's called the Garden of Tranquility, which I don't know if that's irony or not, but it's in the noisiest possible place. A major arterial here, the power plant for the hospital that hoots and tweets at all hours of the day. Again, no shade, and the idea is these arborvitae hedges are going to go up and screen out things, but it's not going to screen out the sound. This was for a fountain, but it's too windy here for a fountain. It's going to blow water all over the place. My suggestion here would open it to the street. Let the street be a distraction, because it's in a bad place to, you need quiet, you need a different setting for this garden to be effective. But we'll see what happens when those hedges grow up. Certainly, unless there's shade there. I look at these gardens about once a week, and I hardly ever see anyone using this particular garden. Okay, have I got time to talk a little bit more? How are we doing?
Yeah, a little more.
Okay.
It's been like 45 minutes.
All right, I'll go very quickly. This is our research center. Here's the commercial at University of Virginia, but tune into us and see what we're up to in terms of research. We research healthy environments at different scales, all the way from cities, regions, right down to individual buildings. Some of the work we're doing now centers on art. We're trying to figure out whether non-figurative art, as opposed to realistic art, is either stressful or desirable. That's a big debate going on now. I don't have time to go into it, but some people think because people are stressed, they don't understand non-figurative art, that they project onto it fears. I don't think that's right. We've experimented, and that's not the case, but it's a big debate. Color theory is another one. The color theory in the center at UVA, I've been talking about. The interior designer was absolutely sure that the color violet, you can see, it would be especially good for cancerous conditions. It could stimulate inspiration and humility. So the sink in the examination rooms is violet. Here, yellow awakens enthusiasm for life, useful for depression. Excessive amounts of yellow can make one superficial or hyperactive. Okay, there's a lot of yellow in here. Now you can tell from my tone of voice, I'm very skeptical about this. I looked at the sources for this decision. There were absolutely no documentation for this kind of color, universal color psychology. The opposite end of the spectrum is color is totally cultural. And there's no such thing as a universal color psychology. Somewhere in between, other people are saying, if there's any sort of convergence, it's that this particular hue of blue, sort of robin's egg blue, is soothing, so it was used in the Couric Center. I'm not at all convinced of this. More research needs to be done. Something I'm involved in now is researching what person I'm working with, Kim Tanzer, who's a former dean at UVA, called sanctuaries. They're called chapels, meditation spaces, quiet rooms, we're studying them in different health environments, trying to see if one particular type of design is preferable to the other in terms of the users. We just started this study. Okay, that's it. Thanks for your attention. Do we have time for questions? Yeah.
The question. Thanks. First of all, thank you for your lecture. That was really interesting. I didn't realize all the components. I'm curious, what led you to this particular field in landscape architecture?
Yeah, because before I was doing history and design study. Well, guess what? 25 years ago, I ended up as a patient and had some pretty serious surgery. I'm fine now. I'm 80 years old, so I'm doing pretty good. I thought that environment was so bad that I said, I'm a designer. There's something got to be done about this. It's really, really bad. So that was a long time ago. And so that, from a very existential way, I started getting involved with it. And, it happened. Some other friends of mine had had similar experiences. So I thought, well, yeah, I can either, I'm fine. The surgery was fine. I can just, say, okay, that's one of life's experiences, but I can make some use of this. Once you've been a patient and you've undergone the stress, it gives you an inside perspective to this and a certain advantage in this. And so that's really why. Yes. Yeah. I've had surgery since. I asked even to be awake during the surgery so I can talk about the design of the examination room. And I say, if I really get scared, knock me out. But so far, but it's very it's interesting to undergo that stress again, just to know how it feels and what you see and what you experience is helping you. Now, I wouldn't just project my own personal experience. That's why we have evidence-based design. But it helps, so that's how. Yes?
I noticed you presented pretty much everything to do with the physical stuff that we can change, that is color, texture, and everything of the environment. But then, looking at 2019 and where we are going, there's a new kind of thread on the block, and that's EMF, electromagnetic frequencies, especially in hospitals. Phones and everything. Is there anything that's been done to mitigate that? Because from some research that I found, like these Wi-Fi routers that we have all over the place, kind of on. So I just wanted to know what measures are being put, especially like ratings like E, for example, if they're looking at that.
No, that's critical. I don't know about it. I know people who are involved in it, but it's a good example of newer areas to investigate in the science. But personally, I can't answer that. But certainly, there's a person. He was at Virginia Tech, who was a lighting specialist. Who's we've had a few conversations, but I don't really know enough to answer your question. But he's researching some of this. Thanks for bringing that up. And that's just one of many, many areas. That, there's a lot we don't know. We know now, I think, enough of some principles I gave you to do a good design, but there are other things that we don't know, and we need to know them. Yeah. Thank you. Thanks. Yes?
Is there any research done on evidence-based design for neighborhoods and residential areas?
Oh yes, lots.
There is?
Well, I'm sure people in the club are doing it here, right? Yeah, I mean, my colleague who's the co-director of the center, her name is Jenny Rowe, is a specialist in that. She's particularly interested in neighborhoods and also, I would say, townscape size things. I don't know, there was a famous study done in Edinburgh where people were fitted out with electroencephalogram caps, and they walked through different parts of Edinburgh. I don't know if you know about this study. And they gauged alpha waves, in a busy area, in a park, in the old, I don't know if you've ever been to Edinburgh, but they have a sort of Georgian 18th century section that's really quite attractive. So her design team has always done in teams, measured alpha waves in those different environments. So she does it all. That's why I say tune in to our website, and I think some of that's going to be up on the website.
That's great.
That's a critical area. I mean, it just happens I'm interested in medical things. Well, I'm interested in everything, but that's where I dig in. But there's plenty of literature on that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yes.
So I'm really glad you brought up that your interest in this came out of you being a patient, because that's kind of where my interest has come out of your research too. A little more than 2 years ago, I was at Johns Hopkins University for an inpatient program for depression, and it really fascinated me how yes, you know, like it was like I was there knowing I was in one of like the best programs in the world, but yet the access to nature was so minimal. And you know, it didn't help, of course, that I was there in January. So it's, you know, so even if there were, you know, plants outside, they were deciduous, and, you know, the trees were bare. But so I guess my question for you is, you had mentioned that you've given feedback as you've had different, you know, experiences. How would you recommend for someone else, for any of us in an audience or anyone else, to give feedback to their medical provider about things that might be useful regarding like the spaces?
It's a great question. I think, well, obviously you have to make specific suggestions, I think. And I think based on your own experience, which is invaluable, you know, what's lacking, what would you like to see? And just tell them. I mean, this is a whole other lecture as to why medical facilities, say 50 years ago, were so bad. Why? I won't go into a long lecture, but basically, to make it very simple, physicians, medical scientists thought that the immune system was autonomous and not influenced by the environment. Now that sounds crazy. Well, it's not, you know, you can simulate an immune response in a petri dish. But that's not enough. I mean, in a clinical situation, it's very different. And so 30 years ago, someone said, whoops, excuse me, your perception of the environment profoundly affects levels of stress. There are a whole number of people who did this, and once that was accepted, the gates opened for better design. But I think patient feedback is really essential, and especially your club here, all the people here involved in, I know that you have interest in neighborhoods and cities as well. As you learn and apply these principles in your own work, let the physicians know about it. We were in Hopkins today. I was looking at, Sarah and I were looking at the sanctuaries. But I noticed there's a lot of pretty good virtual nature scenes on the wall in there. But you're right. The gardens look a lot better in the, but they're small. But that's, when you're in an urban condition, you can do other things. You can use something like this that was given me fits here to show nature videos, which are much livelier. I mean, I've done some of that work at UVA. And so you can, virtual nature will never be as powerful as the real thing, but it is healing. There have been plenty of studies of this. So just tell them about it. Tell them, why don't you put a video screen of you know, beautiful national parks in there, whatever. Yeah. Okay, yeah.
You mentioned how design principles, you talk about the spiritual factor, like this meditation stuff, it's coming around, but it's not fully fleshed out. Are there any guidelines from like cues from like I don't know, religious architecture that have been made into secular kind of guidelines?
Sure. I mean, one of them I showed you, you know, in that meditation space in the Kirk Center. That's like a Zen garden. Well, people who are using that, I don't know. I don't take a poll, but I don't think any of them are Zen Buddhist, or most of them are not. Mm-hmm. But they're using just the stones themselves in a nice arrangement. to be calming. The most effective thing is, it's become a kind of buzzword now that I even hesitate to use it because it's been so diluted, but mindfulness meditation. And I don't know if you ever tried anything like that, but it's devoid really of any a special denominational connotations. It comes from Buddhism and Hinduism, but it's very, very powerful. I do it, and it's very stress relieving, but you're mainly concentrating on your breath and trying not to identify with thoughts at all, or disturbing thoughts, and that's exceedingly calming. But it takes practice. You can't just do it like that. There are classes in it, I'm pretty sure. Do you have any here at Morgan State? Some schools actually have mindfulness classes. Yeah, the problem with it gets associated with some sort of mystical something from the East, And, no, I mean, I don't know if there are any. You might check and see if there are classes in yoga. They're different schools. I don't think it matters.
But there is a new Transcendental Meditation Center downtown Baltimore.
Yeah.
I know, but I'm not aware of anyone.
Transcendental meditation is you pay for it or something.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I know what it is. If it works, it works. But I'll check around here. But if you can practice some sort of mindfulness, which focuses your attention on the present, that you're totally involved with it, it can be a great stress reliever when you're taking an exam.
So has architecture been used to help induce mindfulness?
Yeah.
Am I hearing that correct?
Well, if you're good at it, you can do it anywhere. But no, quiet is essential. Soothing colors. Scale is important. That's one thing we're trying to figure out with these sanctuary studies. There's do you know the term embodied cognition? It's a movement now in environmental psychology that studies the way in which our bodies are influenced by our engagement with space. And I'd recommend a book to you. It's called Welcome to Your World, and it's by Sarah, Heldwagen, I think. But look up Welcome to Your World. It's a new book. It's been out just a couple of years, and it discusses this, and it addresses some of the issues you're raising. I don't know. I mean, that's what we're trying to find out now. And if you ask me what I think a quiet room, a dim room, one that is fairly intimate but maybe has a higher ceiling. There's some studies that show that people who work and do examinations and things in the room with a higher ceiling do better on exams. Maybe that's why I think you have such a great space. I walked in here and said, whoa, what a nice spatial relief. But there's a lot we don't know. But it's Goldhagen is her name. My neurons are firing a little bit here. Welcome to your world. I think you'll find it fascinating.
Cool.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay?
That's great.
Okay. Sorry, I had trouble.